Welcome back, Caniacs. It is season 1, episode 29 of the Caniac Chronicles. I'm your chronicler, Andy, and as all of you can probably agree with me, who isn't feeling pretty good right now? I'm feeling very fine myself. It's Wednesday, about 6 p.m. right now, so we've got the Flyers and Penguins series ahead of us, but I'm choosing to record now and kind of we'll get into the agenda is going to be a quick and easy recap of the first round, and then a preview of what could be in the second round between the Philly and Pittsburgh series. And that series plays tonight. That game 6 is at 7:30 tonight. I think by the time I post this after recording, it'll be Thursday morning, so it will have already happened, and maybe the Flyers will have moved on, or hey, maybe we'll have a game 7 to look forward to on Saturday. But either way, I'm gonna jump straight into it. I mean, what can I say that hasn't been said already for the first round? Canes wrap up a nice 4-game series with Ottawa. Really happy that game wrapped up quick. I think Carolina is really going to benefit from finishing that series off in 4 games. As I was kind of talking about, all throughout that series, that was going to be a very physically demanding series, and obviously it ended up costing us some bodies there with Nikishin taking that hit in game 4 and nearly knocking him out, but sending him into concussion protocol. So yeah, I mean, it was a grinded out series. Those final 2 games, especially Ottawa's at home, all the pressure is on them. They came out firing on every cylinder in both of those games and really demanded a lot from Carolina from a physical standpoint. Carolina passed the test, though, obviously, with flying colors. They come out of that series on a 4-0 win, and they're really turning heads in the mainstream media. It's really nice to see, Paul Bissonnette on the Spittin' Chicklets is really, and I know he sort of has an affiliation now with Carolina, being a co-owner of the Gargoyles out in Greensboro, our EC, I think it's their ECHL affiliate, but regardless, it's good to finally have, and even Witt has come around, which is all not necessarily a good thing given his track record with what, he says and how it turns out. But anyways, Carolina's finally commanding, some, more than some credibility, I guess, this season. It's been 8 years of us in the playoffs, and yeah, we've been to 3 Eastern Conference Finals and only come out with 1 win across the 3 of them. So it's been, very disappointing going in with such hype every year and falling out, sort of flaking out like we do. But I think this first round series, a lot of people were doubting Carolina and saying, especially if Ottawa got, decent goaltending from Ullmark, that they would pull it out. That was kind of how it was throughout the regular season, where if they got average or just above average goaltending, their team would pretty much dominate throughout the regular season. But as I always say, the regular season and the postseason are 2 different types of hockey, 2 totally different, mutually exclusive styles of hockey and what it takes to win across each of them. And Ottawa got more than above average goaltending. They got pretty much Vezina caliber goaltending. I think all of Ullmark's save percentages were right around the 930 mark, probably give or take 5%, so 925 to about 935. And I mean, cup winning goaltenders are right in that range, if not maybe just a little bit above that, around 940 or so. But that's about as good of goaltending as you can get in the playoffs, and Ottawa couldn't even pull off a single game. They couldn't even pull off a single second of holding the lead. Carolina did not trail for even a second throughout that entire series, which, I think ultimately is why it's really starting to turn people's heads. They also had to deal with 4 or 5 5-on-3s. They killed 20 of 21 penalties in total. They just had on the stat sheet complete ownership of Ottawa. And even when you watched the games, it was pretty much like that too. And at times, especially as the series went on, the bench for Ottawa and even the coach really just kind of seemed to me as if they were lost, as if it was, things were slipping away for them, and players and in the coaching staff just couldn't keep up with Carolina. It was for as demanding as Ottawa is as a team, Carolina is up there as well, quite clearly. So hoping, obviously, that they can carry that on. And obviously, the stars of that series are the Stankoven, Hall, Blake line, the HSB line. Hall has 7 points coming from the first round. He has 2 goals. Stankoven coming out of that series with 5 points, 4 of them being goals, and then Jackson Blake getting a goal of his own and ending it with 4 points. So the first line didn't even really have to participate in that game or in that series, and Carolina manages, to completely sweep Ottawa out of the playoffs, despite not having production from their first line. So, like I've said, everything you want to see from Carolina was on full display in that series. Even Freddie Andersen was, ungodly good, more or less. He had a 1.1. He leads the league in postseason for goals against average at 1.1. His save percentage is an astounding .955, and he ends up with 1 shutout. So kudos to Andersen. That being said, he's always good in the first round. He tends to trail off as the rounds go on, and he has usually an abysmal Eastern Conference Finals, depending on which side of the scale he's on. There was a graphic put up for that I do want to put up in front of my face. So here, in the first round, Freddie, in his career with the Canes, so actually Eastern Conference Finals, not either conference, but in his career with the Canes, he's 10-2 in the first round, and this is before Game 3 ended. So I'm guessing this is including the first 2 games of the series as well. But he's 10-2 in the first round, a 1.64 goals against average with a .935 save percentage and 1 shutout. In the second round, he's 10-4 with a 2.09 goals against average and a .908 save percentage. Again, 1 shutout. And then lastly, in the conference finals, and this is where he really falls off, he's 1-6 with a 2.67 goals against average and an .884 save percentage with 1 shutout. So a lot to be continued to be demonstrated from Freddie Andersen, but that first round this season was by far one of his best playoff performances as the Hurricanes goalie. So I'll give him credit. Like I've said in the past, I have always been one of his biggest critics, and I probably will continue to be, but this is his opportunity to really shut me up and prove me wrong throughout this. Kind of like Hellebuck. Hellebuck had a lot of that criticism from the mainstream, over the years for not ever being able to put a conference championship together, let alone a Stanley Cup championship. But he has multiple phenomenal regular season goaltending performances, especially after considering how many games he plays during the regular season. And that gold medal this year at the Olympics was really finally his turning point for all the critics to finally shut their mouths and be like, okay, yeah, Hellebuck really is the real deal under pressure. Maybe he just hasn't had the team in front of him to do it all yet. So again, Andersen, what a display of a performance for him. I think even though his numbers are amazing, he was really a silent killer there for Ottawa. Anytime the team in front of him fell apart, he was right there to bail them out, particularly, in game, I forgot, 2 or 3, Tkachuk had an amazing opportunity right on the doorstep, and Andersen from left to right gets the pad saved by about an inch to keep the game from, to keep Ottawa from going ahead for the first time in the series. Actually, it was game 2 because it was in the overtime. So team as all around has performed as billed, and Andersen particularly shines. Let's just hope that keeps on going for round 2. And, now that we've been talking about how great And so now that we've been talking about how great it was, round one and Carolina's performance in round one was, let's get into, what could be next. It's about an hour away from, puck drop right now for game 6 of the Pennsylvania series. But, I'll go into whatever team. So by the time this is posted, we might already know that it's Philadelphia who will be our matchup. But there's also the off chance that Pittsburgh forces game 7 tonight. They've been looking really good. And Crosby's been looking dialed in, so you never know what could happen tonight. And maybe that is the case. We'll have a game 7 to watch on Saturday to see, who we end up getting for round 2. But for now, I'll start with Philly since they are leading this series and they technically have a better chance of closing it out and moving on. Philly's a young team. Philly has a lot of young talent, a lot of young, high-flying talent in their roster. That is one of their, advantages of their game is they like that transition game. They like that high velocity, fast-paced, transition through the neutral zone and in, whether it's a stretch pass or whether it's a chip in or a lobbed dump in that lands somewhere, at the blue line or somewhere in the offensive zone that their young, speedy guys can get in and cancel out and negate an icing call, or even just get in quick with possession and start setting up. They also like to do that east-west passing once they are set up in the offensive zone. But hey, who else is like that? Carolina. And one thing about Carolina is because they're very similar in that aspect, they will be able to keep that pace. They will be able to keep, the transition game contained. Their defense is built to sort of deal with that. But even their forwards, have a very defensive mind too, a strong back-checking minded roster of forwards out there. There's been a number of times that guys have fallen back from a rush to get back on defense, and some of our forwards have broken up opportunities, odd man rushes, things like that. So the matchup there, I think, is going to be pretty equal. The offensive production will be pretty equal. My one concern about the Philadelphia series is Vladar. Vladar is a tall, good goaltender. He's put a really good run together for Philly. Philly as a whole had to make a really colossal run coming down the stretch of the regular season just to be able to make it to the postseason position that they're in right now. And he was a big part of it, and that's something that does concern me. It is. No matter what has happened so far in that first round, Freddie Andersen is Freddie Andersen, and you never know what you're going to get from him, to be honest. I do hope that he continues with this crease domination that he's had, but as I kind of mentioned, his numbers end up trailing off there in the second round and the third round as the playoffs go on, specifically while he's played for Carolina. So if that is the case, there is the potential that we do get goalied, by Vladar with the Philadelphia Flyers. But other than that, Carolina does stack up pretty well. They obviously have the veteranship edge over Philadelphia. They certainly have the playoff experience edge, and that was on display in round one. I didn't mention that, but that was something that you could really see benefited Carolina in that series against Ottawa, was when times were getting tough, when goals just weren't there, when like in game 2 when the overtime goal got called back and we all thought it was over with. A good 10% of the lower bowl thought it was over with, and left the game after that goal. The Canes just hung in there. They were mentally strong. They stayed with it, and they didn't let it get them down. They didn't let their emotions go crazy, and they took care of business. And that is in line with all the adversity that they've faced, not just over the years, but over this regular season. They faced a lot of adversity in the regular season. And they're very seasoned and tenured when it comes to those aspects. So if this Philadelphia series, there is a lot of adversity, there is a lot of moments where you need to bend but not break, the advantage goes to Carolina there, in my opinion. I will say, I'll put a direct label on it before I keep rambling here, but I'll say Carolina in 6. If it is a Philadelphia matchup, I think that's a very reasonable guess for how the series length will go. I would not be surprised if Philly can, hold their own in game 3 and 4 at home. But I do believe if that happens, Carolina will take care of business in games 5 and 6. So we'll see there. But as long as the goaltending doesn't go crazy for Philadelphia or completely fall apart for Carolina, I do think that Carolina has the edge across the board, especially if that first line starts heating up, or even if any of the other lines start heating up. And obviously the HSB line needs to remain as good as they're doing, but I don't think there's any sign of them falling off at this point. And the rest for this team is just benefiting Carolina. The longer that Pittsburgh draws that series out, the more it benefits Carolina, especially when you consider the Nikishin injury that's going on right now. He's under concussion protocol. That hit initially, that was a very big hit. I think initially it was scary for everyone. Nikishin didn't look quite as bad as some other players have looked in the past after big hits or concussions that happen on the ice. I don't know if he ended up throwing up later on, but, he did kind of stumble there when he first got up, but he did sort of remain upright. And he wasn't, totally dazed, I felt. So I think it looked a lot worse than it was. It's good that he's getting all this rest. It's good that he's, progressing. We actually saw today that he is practicing in a non-contact jersey, so it's good to see he's back on his skates. I think you take his time with him. You don't need him, right away when the series starts. I think they recalled Alexei Legault, and they also have Mike Riley, a very reliable defenseman to leverage at the start of this series. So no rush on Nikishin, but I do probably believe that he'll be back at some point in the second round. And if all that, goes according to plan for Carolina, this series will take care of itself. Like I said, Canes in 6 is my guess on that one. And then last but not least, if Pittsburgh does end up moving on, forcing Game 7 and taking the series there on Saturday, it's still going to be a pretty favorable matchup for Carolina. Obviously, Pittsburgh does bring a lot more experience, a lot more playoff experience, and certainly championship caliber experience. I think there's 6 or 7 Stanley Cups between Letang, maybe even 9 between Letang, Crosby, and Malkin. But Pittsburgh is the older team. I believe they're the oldest team in the in the playoffs this season. They're putting together one heck of a pushback, and after going down 3-0 to Philadelphia, they've brought it all the way to Game 6. Let's hope they can bring it to Game 7. I think as long as that series continues to go, that just more and more benefits Carolina's sake. But they do have a much more competitive comparison when you do compare the veteranship of Pittsburgh and the playoff experience of Pittsburgh against Carolina. But with that being said, I think no matter what version of Freddie Andersen you get, whether it's the .844 save percentage Andersen or the .955 save of the conference finals, or the .955 save percentage of the first round Freddie Andersen that you get, I think either one of those versions of him will smoke Stuart Skinner in a 7-game series. Stuart Skinner, that trade earlier in the season with Edmonton and Pittsburgh, I sort of labeled that a trash for garbage type trade. And I do fully think that will be on display. Stuart Skinner he is very similar to Freddie Andersen. He's never been able to put together a championship run. He has made it further than Freddie Andersen has, but guess what? He did have Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl and the rest of the Edmonton Oilers in front of him for those 2 runs to the finals. And where it really mattered, he kind of fell apart and didn't give them enough to stay in games and to ultimately win them. So, that series against Pittsburgh is going to probably come down to the goaltending. If the offensive diversity doesn't open up. If the first line doesn't get going, then that'll be problematic for Carolina. But as long as that HSB line keeps humming, and like I've said, I really feel like they have no signs of slowing down, then the Carolina Hurricanes should be good to go in a 7-game series with Pittsburgh. I want to say Carolina in 5, but if Pittsburgh does come out of that series with Philadelphia, it's going to give them a lot of mojo. Sidney Crosby looks absolutely locked in, and as we all know, his time, all the guys' times that are playing are numbered, but his is on the shorter end of things. You don't know how much longer he has or how many more opportunities they'll have to play in the postseason. So Crosby could completely open up and take over. It's going to come down a lot to faceoffs against Crosby. But as we saw in the Ottawa series, Carolina, fought through that adversity of not winning as many faceoffs as they normally do. So hopefully that, plays to Carolina's hand. Again, this is just a long-winded way of saying I'll call Carolina in 7 for that one. I would not be surprised if Pittsburgh ends up hanging around and forcing a game 7. But that one, in my opinion, my prediction will come down to who will lose at home first. And I don't think either team will. And if that's the case, then Carolina wins that series because they have home ice advantage with 4 home games. So, with that being said, it's exciting. It's the best time of year right now. It's been a while since we've been able to watch our Canes, but as I've said, if you're getting antsy over that, it's a good thing. It's good for Carolina to get this rest. They can face the adversity of getting back on their feet. That first game, if it does come down to Pittsburgh, if Pittsburgh moves on, that first game will be probably a little tough to get going, but I don't think it will be out of question. I think the Flyers probably have a better chance of stealing game 1 after a well-rested Carolina hits the ice again. But either way, Carolina, I feel, has the conditioning edge. Certainly with Pittsburgh, Carolina has probably the speed in the transition, and that will be a factor that they'll have to handle and deal with. And who knows how beat up they'll be by the end of their series. Actually, either one of the teams, who knows how beat up they'll be. So it's second round ultimately, I feel, will be easier than the first for Carolina. I say that now. It could be one thing later on, but I do feel no matter what happens, Carolina is poised to sort of walk into the Eastern Conference Finals, and I hope they do. I hope, the more rest, the better. Obviously, they've been playing. A lot of those guys have been playing lots of deep playoff runs, and this rest will help them. Guys who are beat up, like Nikishin, definitely going to benefit them. Nikishin's in concussion protocol, and that's a very delicate thing. But you do really hope that he can make his comeback, because he's another guy. If he starts heating up offensively, and even when he's not heating up offensively, he's laying some pretty big hits of his own and putting guys into the ice like Clevin did to him, not injuring anyone or causing any concussion of any kind. But he can lay the body, he can lay the boom, and that is a big benefit to a team that can do that. Any team that can impose their physical will on another stands to, as the series goes on longer and longer, stands to end up walking away with it, just because of how demanding that would be on the other team. And hopefully Pittsburgh does succumb to that. Hopefully line 1 opens up. I really expect the first line to open up no matter who the opponent is. Like I was thinking, Jarvis, we really saw him sort of start to wake up there at the end of the Ottawa series. He does make that play and makes that pass to Aho for the empty netter. And even though that was a pretty gimme goal, he took a heavy hit to do that. And he got right up and started giving it to the Senators fans that were on the glass there. So it's good to see that from him. I think we really needed to see that. I think that's a good sign for him. Aho, maybe it's a good thing that he got those 2 empty netters, that maybe that gets him kicking again. And as I've mentioned, Svechnikov has just played great hockey. He hasn't showed up on the score sheet really at all, I don't think. But he's been doing all the right things, and he's eventually going to get rewarded for that. And even on top of that, with the stall line, with Carrier, with Delorier drawing in there for that final game, and Jankowski, they've all looked good too. They come out and they don't play as many minutes as those other two lines, but they also have the threat of being an offensive weapon or an offensive converter at any point in the game, in the series at large. So the team, either way, you want to see this team remain consistent. That's a big thing, and trying to accomplish anything, consistency is a big factor. But certainly going into this second round, which I do believe will be a bit easier than the first one, like I said, I think for the Pittsburgh, you're definitely going to see a downgrade in goaltending. And if Philly makes it out, you're still going to have a pretty, maybe not as confident Vladar because of these two games. And hopefully if Pittsburgh can force Game 7, then you also have that kind of weighing down on Vladar. And that might play into Carolina's favor. As long as Freddie remains consistent, as long as the team around him does, and any additional scoring that you get just continues to sort of build upon that wave of momentum for Carolina. And actually, just realizing it's not been Stuart Skinner in net for Pittsburgh. He was pulled after game 2 or 3. It's been Artur Silovs, and so barring any sort of potential for being goalied by either Silovs or Vladar, I think it's really going to come down to Carolina walking through those series. It's just a matter of if those goalies, put up better than an Ullmark performance is really what it looks like it has to take. But yeah, not Stuart Skinner, and I think that just kind of plays more into the estimation that it'll take Carolina 7 games to get through Pittsburgh if Pittsburgh comes out of that series. With that, folks, I am going to get going. Like I think I haven't mentioned it on this recording, but I've been having some serious issues with the videos, recording the video portion of this series, of this current episode. So I got to figure out what's going on. It is just going to be an audio this week. I do apologize, but I'll still post to YouTube. I'll figure out something for that. But anyways, without further ado, folks, I do appreciate you listening. Your chronicler, Andy, and go Canes.